You just came off stage. I wanted to ask you about some of the topics that came up that are sort of top of mind to the industry, either in that room or in terms of conversations you're having with clients.
I think the two big issues that came up are related. I mean, the panel was about data and looking at data quality and understanding how to integrate data into, advertising decision making. And I think the two things that keep coming up over and over again are how do you measure unduplicated reach and frequency in a cross-platform world, which is still really hard, and how do you assess the quality of data sets that you're using for targeting or for measurement or for both. And so those are sort of the two major threads we talked about. The two, I think, potentially get solved together in a, where we came out with this was in a blockchain-y like solution, and I don't want to be too prescriptive about how it happens, but until you've got some sort of tokenized identity where on one hand you empower consumers to control the data about them that gets collected, and on the other hand you have standard ways of connecting that and rolling that up that extend across all the various different platforms. I think that's where we eventually get to. The question is, how long does that take, and what are the stops along the road to get there?
So you've been to many conferences, some that are more focused on data analytics, run by various organizations, and it's become a subject du jour for a lot of the media conferences. There's a lot bubbling up in terms of data sources, and I guess the question I have is, there's the question of how valid it is, and people sort of claiming that they have these great sources of new data for decisioning and building companies, and there's a lot of excitement, but how do we sort of separate what's real and what's not?
So there are a finite number of humans on the earth and a finite number of people that I can keep track of and try to target ads to and that can buy my clients' products or services. So data that on some level doesn't connect back to that finite number of people in a known way, I would argue is it's hard to know how helpful it is, because I don't know, whether it's this person theoretically was exposed to this media content at this time, or this person bought such and such somewhere at some point in time. Ultimately, I want to be able to connect those, not necessarily at the individual level, but at a rolled up enough level to make smart decisions about what advertising messages should go to what people at what time in order to get to an effect. And I think the more transparency we have around how data gets collected and how it connects back, ultimately the more useful it is. I mean, we've lived in this world where every different publisher's walled garden and the data that they collected was their competitive advantage. And the problem is that I don't want to talk to people based only on whether they're heavy users of one platform or another, or viewers of one kind of content or another. I need to be able to reach beyond that.
So what might be your wish for a roadmap to make that happen?
So a couple of things I think need to happen for us to get into a more harmonious data environment. One is some kind of standardization of, on the publisher side, how we measure and count an impression, and that isn't going to be one thing. It's going to be, an individual experienced a piece of content on some platform at some point in time with some attributes attached to it. And I think trying to reduce that to a unit impression in a world where all impressions are fungible is the wrong thing to do, right? The notion of GRPs for digital, because we knew how to understand GRPs, so we should reduce a lot of complex information to the simplest possible thing to make it comparable, didn't serve anybody very well, because we threw out a ton of useful data on one hand and then ended up counting something that was meaningless. So the first step is you have to count exposures in a way that is nuanced but still standardized. And I think that will be some sort of a standardized counting API that publishers end up exposing. And then the other piece of it is a way to connect those together through some sort of a person-based identity solution. And in order to keep that from being too creepy, it has to meet some of the rules we're hearing about in the world of GDPR, the idea of privacy by design and the idea of a right to be forgotten. So I, as an individual, can say, I no longer trust this publisher with my data, they have to forget me. And if you sort of build from the consumer side and from the publisher side toward a solution that looks like that, I think eventually we get to something that works for everybody. Kumbaya.